Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's stream. This is a really cool one. Welcome to the vscode YouTube channel. And today we're going to be talking all things MCP server, but where MCP servers and design meet code generation and how you can play with them. I am joined today by Akbar from Figma. So I want to bring up Akbar. Hey, how you doing? How are you?
Doing great.
Awesome. Well, I am brilliant, and I realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Hampton. I'm a senior cloud advocate from Microsoft, based in the Visual Studio Code developer tools team. But today is going to be a really awesome stream. We lock in, jump in the chat, be really active, ask us loads of cool questions. We got some really cool stuff happening today. So Akbar, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? Where are you currently residing?
Yeah. So I'm Akbar. I'm a developer advocate from Figma. What that means is I do a lot of similar things that like Liam does, talk to people in the community, help educate about our developer facing products, and trying to bring as much feedback to the team as possible to make sure that we're building tools that work the way developers expect them to. I'm based in New York. Yeah, I think that's about everything.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I think our job is really interesting because we sit in between a lot of different products, a lot of different teams, and obviously the community to get that feedback and make these products much better. And I think we're in a really interesting time now where we've got a lot of AI, a lot of MCP server stuff, everything that's happening so quickly. So I guess, why don't we jump into it? Why don't we just get right into this with you?
Let's do it.
What are you going to share?
Yeah, just a quick level set. We're going to be talking about the Figma MCP. And so let me just adjust my screen real quick. This is how you know it's live. We're obviously moving things as we go. But for those that don't know, MCP stands for the Model Context Protocol. And the Dev Mode MCP server means that you can take the information that's coming out from Figma's Dev Mode from your design files and bring them into your code base to do design-informed code generation, to be able to get all sorts of information about the things that you're building directly from the Figma designs and make sure that it's informed by what you already have in your code base. Now, just to go a little bit more into that MCP explainer, just for those that don't know, today we can do a lot of interesting things with AI code generation, right? And it can get you pretty close to that end product. When it comes to like prototyping, really great for bringing in rapid interactions. But to get something that makes that's a bit more aligned with the way that you're writing code and the patterns in your code base, then we also need to bring in context from your code editor. And with agentic code editors today, like VS Code with GitHub Copilot, code-based context being provided to your LLMs, you're able to get to a result that's much closer to what you would actually use in production. Now, adding on to that, Figma design context, for bringing in components, bringing in variables, understanding what this final design should look like. By bringing all of that into it, we're actually taking all of those best practices that come from design to code when it comes to handoff, when it comes to providing as much information and context between designers and engineers as possible. The MCP makes it a lot more, the MCP allows that information to be also brought to your LLM. So all those things that were already previously beneficial will continue to be beneficial and will only be multiplied by our agentic editing workflows. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go into this live, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. So we have a Figma file over here. Really important. We want to make sure that we're in dev mode. I'm going to talk a little bit through how to start with just getting set up with the MCP server. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go to your code editor. We want to go to your settings. And I think there's a keyboard shortcut. It's like command comma. And then we want to search for MCP. And then the next thing that you want to do is go to edit in your JSON settings and add in your Figma Dev Mode MCP server. This information will also show up on our help center. This information will also show up when you enable the MCP in Figma, which I'm going to show you how to do that in just 1 second. But it is a server-side event MCP. It's run on localhost. And this is the information that you would want to bring in here. And then you can just check if it's run. Oh, go ahead.
Quick question about this. So you're putting this in your settings.json. Is this your user settings or is this your workspace settings?
This is currently my workspace settings, or my user settings, actually. Let me make that correction. This is actually my user settings, but there are a few different ways to set up these MCP servers. Like you mentioned, you can have workspace settings for individual workspaces. And I believe that there are a couple more that you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So I think you got user settings. So like your user, or it's like this settings.json, which is global, so globally available in VS Code. And then you've got your workspace, which is project. And I think there's another way where you can sort of have mcp.json instead. So you can actually have all of your MCP servers inside a separate JSON file, and then just pull that into whether it's like a workspace or a user settings, like a global or a project-based settings. So there's a couple of different ways you can do this. So that's pretty cool. Thank you for putting that one out.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. My Figma MCP on Figma is already enabled, so I'm just going to make sure that I restart this, make sure we don't have any issues. But now I'm just going to walk through how you might enable this in Dev Mode. So first things first, once again, make sure that you are in Dev Mode. You want to make sure you have all the green accents. This toggle is selected. Might look slightly different depending on your plan of the toggle, but the green will tell you that you're in Dev Mode. The next thing is make sure that you don't have anything selected. So this is the easiest way to get to the MCP server settings, where you'll just see it down here on the right-hand sidebar where we have our MCP server. And right now you can see that the status is enabled. There's also this drop down for additional settings, but we can cover that a little bit later. And an easy place for us to get beta feedback. Because the MCP server is in beta, we're trying to make sure that we can build this to meet our developer needs as much as possible. And make sure that we're listening to our developers as we continue to make this a better experience. One other way to make sure that you can enable the MCP server, just an alternate to this, is by going to your main menu while you're in Dev Mode, go to Preferences, and then there's this checkbox for enabling the Dev Mode MCP server. So once we have all of that, we are ready to go. And I'm just going to go ahead and start with a pretty simple example. So we have our MCP server set up. I'm going to go ahead and close the settings window. I'm going to close the settings window. I already have my chat open up. And I have this right now, and I believe my server's already running, but let me just double check. Let's close this real quick. Open up the terminal. Yeah, okay. So I have my server running. So this is on my app.tsx. This is just a live app, just showing an example of what a production code base might look like. This is using something called Simple Design System, which is an open source library that we publish to kind of demonstrate a lot of these different workflows. I'm going to share the links to this after the end of the stream. So anybody who wants to can tinker and even recreate the things that we do today. But this is what it looks like. Fairly straightforward web page. We have a hero section. We have a bunch of different like web elements that you might expect. We have a pricing card, all this stuff. Right. This is all stuff that's interactive. It's responsive. So like I can go to a smaller size and we can see that respond, all that stuff. And for now, for the purposes of this demo, I'm actually going to get rid of most of this. We're just going to keep our header and our footer. And then this little demo component, that's currently empty. So I'm going to go ahead, whoopsies, and just delete these. So now when we look at our live app, this is what we got. And I'm going to demonstrate what it looks like to take something from a Figma design and use the MCP server to generate that code. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to Figma. The way that the MCP server works is it takes into account what you currently have selected in Figma in Dev Mode. So you can either do it from your actual current selection. There's also an alternate by just providing the link to that current selection, which I can get by right-clicking, copy link to selection, or the keyboard shortcut Command L. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray that the demo gods are in my favor today, and we're going to do this live. So we have our demo file. I'm going to jump into that demo file. Once again, it's empty, just to show, like, have a clean workspace for us to modify this and make sure that we can like easily control the nature of this demo. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make sure that I'm in agent mode. If you're not, Shift Command I is the keyboard shortcut there. I'm going to be using Claude Sonnet for this, but we might have to change that depending on the model availability. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to directly call some of these tools. You don't necessarily have to do this. This is just a really precise way to call the tools. I'm going to do get code from Figma and implement in demo.tsx, and make sure to use pricing. Yes. So I'm going to quickly walk through what I wrote in this prompt. This is our pricing card. We have some data in our code base about how this pricing card should be operating and the context that should be provided. And so the great thing here is that we'll be able to take in context from our code base. We're also able to take in this context for what we have in our design. We know this is a pricing card, and I want to make sure that I'm implementing this. I'm using get code from Figma and implementing in Figma, and I'm just going to go ahead and run this. Now you might notice a couple of things. So we have our Copilot just kind of walking through us, and it's saying that it's going to run this tool from the MCP server. I also want to just call out quickly that before it even gets started, it's actually using a couple of things to make sure that our output is expected. And one of those things is Copilot instructions, which is a file that you can use to provide further details to your AI LLM. We can click into this and it shows just kind of like, you might notice this is actually very human readable. And the idea here is like, this is all the documentation that you would normally have for this type of code base. And you're able to provide that to the LLM. All the context that's good for a human engineer is also good for an LLM. And being able to just kind of see all the different things. This is, we can dive into this a little bit further, but this is just kind of an example of like where everything is, what our file structure looks like, how our components are set up, and even example snippets of how some of these components should be composed or should be used together, as well as common pitfalls that the LLM might go through, or even another engineer might go through, that they need to kind of figure out.
This is probably one of the most verbose custom instructions or Copilot instructions files I think I've ever seen. So this is a really good job. Thank you for pointing this one out, because I was actually going to question you on that one in terms of references. How did you think to write these Copilot instructions? Like, what was the thoughts behind that? Because this is typically where an engineer would come in, right? And these are the kind of, you're kind of brainstorming, I think, at this point, of what you are second guessing the LLM to be doing. Like, it kind of gives guide rails, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And
no, that's really cool.
A big part of this just comes from doing, experimenting and trying out these LLM workflows and seeing what's working and what's not quite working, right? Yeah. As you experiment with them, and of course, like the tools will get better over time, but as you're experimenting, you might notice things that, like, through your development experience and through your engineering expertise, right? All that stuff is still very key and still very important in this world of agentic code editing. All that stuff, I would argue, is even more important now, in terms of understanding like when the code that's generated matches your best practices, matches the things that that you want, to elevate your engineering practices, make sure that it's scalable, make sure that it's consistent, make sure that it's testable, right? All of those things are insights that you kind of gain over time, and especially when you're experimenting with the LLMs, you'll start noticing some of the pitfalls that are happening. And so through experimentation, we would see these and then just start documenting them.
No, that's really cool. I think I've only ever really seen this with sort of like database schemas and like really precise like meta prompts in a sense. So it's really cool to see this being used like to its full advantage. There's one question in the chat which I just want to pull out before you click continue. I'm just going to bring it up on the screen. And it says, so are you using Docker for running Figma MCP server locally? And I'm picking this out because it's a really interesting question, because this kind of branches off into two things. Obviously, there's the answer of what you're actually using, but then there's a differentiation between a local MCP server and a remote MCP server. So maybe we can like talk about that just a little bit before you click continue, because I think that'll be a really good one to go into.
Yeah, I can't speak too much to the actual implementation for our local MCP server, just to specify that it is running locally. It's doing server sent events. But the remote server is something that the team is actively interested in and actively thinking about. Right now, only the local server is available, but that's something that the team is actively working on and hoping to have some news for you on that front soon.
Awesome. Thank you for jumping on that one. I think it's a really cool area to talk about, right?
Yeah, I could actually just provide a little bit more clarity in that the MCP server is actually running from the Figma desktop app. And specifically, the Figma desktop app is currently required to run the MCP. We're really excited about those remote workflows so that you can use MCP even when you're using Figma in the browser. But currently, using the Figma desktop app is required.
Really interesting implementation. I like that. That's pretty cool. All right, I'm gonna leave you to it. You carry on with this demo, please. I want to see this happen. We want to see agent mode.
Yeah. So we mentioned those references. It's also, this is something that was called out in the instructions. It's also referencing our our theme.css. So like this has an insight into all of our design tokens that already exist in our code base. So now what I'm going to do before I hit continue is I'm actually just going to click the see more just so that we can see a little bit more about the command that's running. So we're going to run get code from the Figma Dev Mode MCP server. It's showing just kind of like how this is working, how you can command it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and click on continue. I'm going to be doing these manually, but of course you could always just allow in this session, allow in this workspace, and always allow. And the reason I'm doing this manually is just so that we can walk through like all the different things that are happening. So I'm going to click on continue. You can see that it's running get code. Once again, demo gods are helpful to us today. We can see the inputs over here, but then also these outputs. So this first output over here is actually a React representation of our design. And it's surfacing components that are coming from Code Connect. So like Code Connect is a feature in Figma that allows you to connect your code components to design components that your designers are using to make sure that there's a mapping between them. And so we're surfacing some of that information here so that we know we're using the right components that are being represented in this design. And one thing that I want to clarify here is that although this is a React output, this is not actually doing the code generation that the LLM will be doing. This is a representation for the LLM to parse through to make sure that it understands what's happening here. We're going to go and look in the demo file where we see that it's already started to generate some of this stuff. And we're going to just kind of like take a look at some of the other details here. We also see some more design tokens, and we see some more information. So this is the agent working. You can see that it's reading files in our code base. We can see that it had that context. It's starting to write some things down. It's starting to understand like, okay, like now that I've written this, let me check it for some errors. Once again, it saw that the text price component only supported a couple of specific sizes, so it fixed the demo component. And now it's going to try to run this command in the background terminal. I'm actually going to cancel this just because I'm already running it. I don't want it to run again. So I'm just going to click on cancel there. But we have all of our changes. We can just visually inspect this really quickly. I'm going to go ahead and keep these changes and save that. And then if we head over here, we see that we have our pricing card component. There are a few issues here, right? Like we can notice already, like the styling is a little bit off. I'm going to go ahead and correct this really quickly. And I noticed that there was a question in the chat that like about what MCP server code generation is. That specifically is this right here, right? We're providing this code gen output for the LLM to actually interpret and then be able to do its own code generation. So like that can take into account whatever frameworks you're using. But we have this React implementation that allows our LLM to kind of interpret this. So the code generation will work with other frameworks. This representation internally is just React. This is not what the code generation will output. So just want to really clarify that.
So you actually mentioned that you said it works with other frameworks, and there was a question which was in the chat, which was actually angled very much towards that. And it was, does it work with other frameworks like Angular? So I'm guessing yes.
Yeah. So like the biggest point of clarity there is that like the MCP server is not doing the code generation. That's your LLM, right? The MCP server is providing context to your LLM to do that code generation. And so your LLM will be able to support all of those frameworks, right? It's going to take that context, that design context, to understand what each of these components are, and it's going to bring that over. When it comes to Code Connect, what's surfacing some of this information, that does support Angular when you're doing that more manually, but also just providing this context into your design files. And so we support React, many HTML-based frameworks, Jetpack Compose for Android, as well as /Kotlin for Android, and then Swift UI for iOS. Hopefully that clears up that question.
Thank you.
Cool. So I'm going to fix some of the styling stuff over here. Let's go ahead and find, here we go. So this is where our navigation pill is. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this align secondary is stretch. and then do the same thing down here. And this is just another example where, like, you know, even though we have a lot of this generated, this is still, it requires that kind of nuance, some of that experience being a software engineer, just to make sure that we're getting the output that we want. Like, we don't want to just trust this at face value. We want to make sure that we're inspecting it, make sure that we're making modifications. We have this, we're fixing this already. I think I actually just need to change the flex that's in. So let me go ahead.
Kind of like the validation side of it, right? And
yep,
it's
exactly.
nice to see that you're actually keeping the human in the loop at this point. It's yep. Good to see.
So I'm just going to do a little quick flex direction row and bring the close flex right here. And that should, interesting. Oh, yeah. And then our align primary center. Let's bring that in here. And now this looks a lot more like a pricing card. Now, another thing that I really want to call out here is this looks a little different from what we saw in our design, and that's intentional. Now, in our design, first of all, we're in light mode. Yet, in our example, it's actually taking into account that my computer is in dark mode, and it's bringing in those token values. And the only way that it knows how to do that is because we're using these token values. The things that we saw over here, right? Like, these are all of our different variables. We're seeing the different values that come in here, and it's using all of our theme CSS, our code base, to make sure that all of this stuff is being surfaced appropriately, and that we're taking into account that the users is using dark mode, and so that we're rendering the right thing. So that's the first major difference, right? First major difference, this is in dark mode while the design was in light mode. So this helps in that discrepancy where, like, sometimes design is representing a single state, but when we're engineering, we want to be considerate of all the various states and all the various things that could be happening in our user's environment. And this is the difference between design and code sometimes, right? Where we can think a bit more adaptive, we can think a bit more responsive. The other thing you'll notice too is that the content is slightly different. Now, normally the MCP would just take the content directly from the file when there's no other context, but we did tell it to use that use pricing, and we gave it some other context. And this is actually being informed by a database that's in this code base, and some mock data that's here, so that we're representing the data that we're using. So in a production environment, right, we're not always going to want to use mock data. We want to reference a database we might already be using, reference assets and data that already exist in our code base, and we don't necessarily want to have mock data or have to replace that, right? And so this is taking that into account because I gave it that specific context in my prompt. And you'll notice it has that functionality in here too that did not exist in the design. So you'll notice that advanced is currently selected, or sorry, advanced is set over here. And if I upgrade to advanced, this is my current plan. I can upgrade to business, or I can downgrade to beginner. And if I switch to yearly, once again, we see all of that context in here. I've just noticed another issue in the actual design, and that's something that I can correct later. But we're noticing that it's taking into account data that existed in our code base, did not exist in Figma. And you can see the copy over here is also adjusted. So even though I'm on monthly, I'm at $5 a month. If I want to go annual, I can click on this, and then it'll take that into account. So even between monthly and yearly, it's keeping track of that state. I'm going to do a quick pause here just to make sure that we run into any questions that might have come up, and give that a chance.
That's pretty cool. I love to see it. I think you're kind of solving a lot of, I guess, from a back-end engineer's perspective, you're solving a lot of our issues with this kind of code generation with Figma. Like, the crossover between front-end and back-end dev has always been pretty hard as it is. I guess you kind of like sit in one of two camps, right? You're either a front-end dev or a back-end dev. I very much back-end. I've never done front-end. My websites are really rubbish, but this is going to absolutely boost them. I love this. We have got some questions in the chat, and I think there's one of them which we can probably re-explain kind of where the MCP server sits in comparison to an LLM. So you gave a really good overview as like how an MCP or where an MCP sits in this chain. Can you just go back over that for us to try and help understand this?
Yeah. So first thing, I'm just going to kind of clarify, and of course, I may have messed up the terminology here, and of course, we're working with developers, so we want to be precise. The MCP is providing all this design context. I actually have some slides that kind of cover a little bit of that. We're bringing in patterns, right? Like the way that you want to think about all this different context is kind of 4 categories. The first one is patterns that already exist and have alignment between design and code. So your designers are using components in Figma that relate to components that you might be using in code. This stuff already exists. This is kind of a representation of how designers and engineers currently work together. But in Figma, we also surface that as file path references and even Figma variables with code syntax. So that's one way. The next is image data. So there's still a lot of reasons to share image data to the LLM. The LLM will request a screenshot when it needs it, just to make sure that it understands the full visual context. For instance, in this example, to understand the visual context of the entire section of the pricing page, both across mobile and desktop, and figure out which components might be missing. It also brings in that pseudocode. This is that React representation that we were talking about, right? This isn't the thing that's actually doing the generation. That's your agentic model, right? Like Claude Sonnet 4. The LLM is powering like the knowledge base. The agent is allowing it to do that code generation. And then the MCP is providing that context to inform that code generation. Hopefully that answers the other question as well. And then finally, also the content. So if we didn't have that database hooked up already, and we just needed that mock data, right? We can take that content directly from Figma in terms of like what's being labeled in the design. But there's one extra level here in that all of the context from layer information that designers are using are also being taken into account. So in the component itself, we know that the layers are named by their rating, by the review title, by the review content. And even for the user information, there's like an avatar placeholder and a reviewer name and a review date. All of that metadata is also being provided as context for your LLM. And so this also provides some interesting opportunities and some interesting things that you can do where like you can really quickly spin up some like demo instances and demo data by taking advantage of the fact that it has that metadata. And you can say, I want to replace this content with content about burgers instead, or content about cats, all that stuff.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. It's nice to see this. That's a really good explanation. It's kind of cool to see how LLMs are now talking to have live data availability and more context behind them. Just using APIs, like as you would generally. And I was thinking that as you were going through the chat and you were just showing the Copilot chat output, is it the JSON block that you had looks very similar to what you'd ask in other sort of API tool callings, right? It's really cool that we can do this now. So yeah, awesome stuff. Thank you for pausing. We will probably crack on with this one. I think in the little time, I think we've only got about 20 minutes left, maybe 15 minutes left. So I'm going to let you crack on and continue.
So one other thing that I definitely like to show is I'm going to actually start from scratch again. That was an example of like a small piece. And when it comes to like best practices when using the MCP, like one of the things that we recommend highly is being very specific when you're working with this, right? Like the smaller section that you're picking, the less LLM context you'll be blowing out, right? Like the less information you'll be sharing with the LLM in terms of using your tokens. For efficiency, it's better to have like smaller selections, more specific selections, but you can still use this in a way that you can support a large selection. So I'm actually going to reset this demo file and let's just empty this out. I don't know why I made that sound effect, but
hey, we all do. Don't worry.
So I'm gonna reset this. Once again, we have this empty. I actually have another design example here, and this is again using Simple Design System. I actually wrote this a bit of like a mock-up landing page for a cat adoption agency. And so what I'm actually going to do this time is instead of just having it generate that one section, I'm going to have it generate everything except for the header and footer, which I already have as components. So I'm going to go back to GitHub Copilot. I'm going to start a new chat. This is another really great like best practice. Start a new chat. Just make sure that you erase older context. One thing you might notice, I'm going to close this file as well. We already know that it's always going to front load those Copilot instructions. That's a great thing that I didn't call out earlier. When we're using instructions files, you can think of it essentially as front loading your prompt and using those instructions first before it takes into account what your prompt is. And that order of operations is really key to make sure that your outputs are consistent. Cool. So we have this demo file. I'm going to make sure that I have my selection selected. This is very important because I always forget, and I want to make sure that I don't mess this up in the demo. So I have that there. And instead, I'm going to get code from Figma. And implement in demo.tsx, but ignore the header and footer in Figma design. And let's start off with that. We might have to make some corrections along the way, but let's.
I love how you're doing this freehand. It's kind of cool.
Yeah,
this I know is live.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, it might be inviting some chaos, but
that's fine. It becomes like a group debug project.
Exactly.
You got like 200 people on the stream to help us. It's fine. Don't worry.
100%. Now you can see this is our GitHub Copilot agent. It's actually reading a bunch of different things in our code base first before it asks to use the MCP. So this is just doing like a little bit of prep work. It's reading the Figma to config.json, all this stuff. And now let's run this. Let's hope that it's using the right selection. It looks like it is based on what I'm seeing here. Oh, yeah. Okay, I see catted up down there. And then we have our tokens here, all that stuff. Once again, this information is coming directly from Figma. We can see the demo is empty right now. It's going to go ahead and fill that up. It's now searching for files and specific components from the Figma design. And it's doing that matching based on a combination of what context is being surfaced from the MCP, but then also context that we have in our instructions file, where we know that, like, if we see a hero component, we're going to use these hero cards. If we see a card component, we're going to use these cards. All that stuff. We're going to run through this. And this always takes some time. If it doesn't end up working out, I do have a pre-bake, or if it takes a little too long, I have a pre-bake that we can go into, but I'll let this run for a little bit. And this gives us a little bit of a chance to also pause and take any questions while this is running.
Oh, I can't see any other questions at the moment
Okay,
to ask.
great.
But I do have one of my own.
Yeah,
and it's based around your model choice. So I see you're using Claude Sonnet 4. And I think there's probably a good chance to talk about how you would use different models, right? So how and why did you choose Claude Sonnet 4 for this?
Yeah, this honestly has been a bit of a trial and error. And one thing that I'm actually curious about from the VS Code and the Copilot team is, how are you thinking about, as a developer, like, I don't necessarily have time to try every single different model under the sun, right? Like, what are you doing on the editor side to make that choice a little bit easier and a little bit more intuitive for developers, right?
That's actually a really good question. And I can't speak for the whole team from that side, but I can tell you from a personal perspective. So these models themselves are trained in obviously different ways. So I was actually doing a bit of research earlier around GPT 4.1, GPT 4.5 and 4.0. And just looking at, whether you're looking at cost reduction or how much it's costing you to use these models, whether you want common development, whether it's specialized development, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. So if you're doing sort of basic demos, or you're doing real basic, well, I say basic, not really basic, because all coding can be complicated. But if you're starting out fresh from a very sort of scratch, you'd probably want a sort of a low tier model. You wouldn't want to be throwing lots of money at a really high tier, high throughput model from that perspective, just to get a hello world program. So I think from my perspective, I look at what stage in the development cycle I'm at, depending on the model that I'm going to use, and obviously how much I want to cost an organization or myself in that instance when using them. And then obviously you've got multimodal models, right? So I think for 4.0, GPT 4.0 is multimodal. So it's text and image. So I'm probably not going to use images unless it's going to be on a README, or whether it's like a diagram or a mermaid diagram, something like that, where it can go off and create something. So I look at it from that perspective. And there's multiple ways. Like I said, if you're looking at cost reduction, if you're looking at speed or throughput, I sometimes find 4.1 is a little bit faster. And I'm actually testing out and trialing 4.5 at the moment. It's in preview. So you can see there at the bottom, like Claude 4, Sonnet 4 is in preview. That's kind of how it shows what's coming next. But I guess that's probably some feedback I can take to the team, actually.
100%. I mean, one thing that I do appreciate is that Copilot does make it really easy for me to try different models. It's only showing these right now, but I believe there's a configuration when you set up the chat on like which models you want to make available. And especially when it comes to like either a personal license or even like a business license, like being able to have that flexibility to try these different things to figure out what works best for our team is really, really helpful. Okay.
But one thing I can say quickly before you carry on is we do have documentation based all around these models, which I'm just going to dig out and have posted in the chat for everyone to look at, just to give you an idea of what's kind of broken down for these. But fantastic. You go ahead. I'm going to dig this out.
Awesome. Yeah. So it looks like it's done most of the work. It's asking to run the development server. I'm actually just going to pause this right now. One thing that's really helpful too is like if Copilot notices that the agent's been working for a while, it will let you know. It's like, do you want to continue iterating in this? Do you want to just pause right here? It looks like we're in a good enough spot. I'm just going to go ahead and keep this. There's something interesting that looks like is happening over here that I'm hoping is the right case. Awesome. So we have a bit more issues in terms of the actual responsiveness, which of course, live demo, whatever. But one thing that you might notice actually is that it took in context from our code base to bring in these assets. So these cat images, you know, all sourced from, I believe they were sourced from Unsplash. These are actually in our code base in our assets down here. And it was able to properly interpret that like, oh, if I'm showing a cat, I probably want to show one of these cats. And it put that into the code base. So that already fantastic. It also did the same thing with their parents, the pet parents, where it brought those images in directly. We're using these accordion components, right? And this is, you know, it's not perfect, but pretty good for a one shot, right? Like we didn't provide it any further context. It actually wanted to run the server and test this to try to figure out any errors in the first place. And I'm the one who didn't allow it to do that. So this is actually really interesting on how much and how quickly you can ramp up, especially if you have less of a background in front-end engineering, right? Like I think that's the biggest unlock here, where you're no longer fully limited by your domain knowledge and you're able to kind of try new things and experiment really quickly. But that domain knowledge will only help you make this even more robust, even more scalable, you know, even, and this provides an opportunity to learn each of those different things. So this is an example of like a much bigger context window, right? This wasn't just one component. This was many. And one of the things that you're going to want to think about as you're using MCP and as you're using these agentic editors is the scoping of how you're approaching this iteration. You might notice there's a lot more issues here, and that's partially because the scope is so much bigger, right? There's more room for error, and this is part of why we recommend using those smaller snippets. But again, it's not out of the scope of what this does, and this is only going to improve over time. Even the Dev Mode team is working on ways to make sure that your selections can be larger and that it doesn't blow out the context window, especially when you're using a model that doesn't have as large of a context window. Another thing that I wanted to kind of mention here is that when it comes to those use cases, you can think about how you're going to be using an AI agent like Copilot in a few different ways, right? Like if you're a design systems engineer, you might focus on a specific component, right? So I might like click on this button and go to where it exists in the main library. This might take a second to load. There we go. And I might just use this as my context, right? This is my context. I want to help build out some of these components. One of the great things here is that this can enable being able to distribute that work in a very different way, right? Instead of just like the code generation aspects of using the AI agent, there's also ways to just kind of use this to evaluate which components already exist versus which don't. How can I like make a list to track of like which components I need to build, maybe set up some tasks and start going through and maybe even having the agent start some of those tasks as a way to enhance and improve my development and shipping speed, right?
I think this is absolutely epic. I think one question burning on everyone's mind: are you a cat person or a dog person, or is this just?
I do both, but personally, I do have a cat, and so that's a bit of my attachment over there.
I love that.
Yeah,
absolutely love that. No, awesome demo. I mean, so tell us a little bit more about where this actually came from. Where did you find the pitfalls in sort of development around MCP server development, or development as a whole with design aspects? Like, where did this come from?
Yeah. So a lot of it, again, back to like personal experience. Before this, I was a UX engineer, and before that, I was a front-end engineer on iOS and web platforms. So a lot of this is informed by working directly with designers, right? As Figma, we operate in a very special space in that we have a lot of this context from designers. Designers are using Figma directly. We're creating a lot of these workflows to make sure that designers are able to iterate and express their ideas and communicate their intent, right? Ultimately, Figma is a communication tool. We act at all different parts of the product development process. But one of the main key points that we're trying to do is make sure that the communication between designers, between PMs, between engineers, right, all those different bases is a lot easier and a lot clearer because you're able to visually express your ideas. You're able to take your ideas and bring them to imagination. And that, that surfaces across all of our different products. But Dev Mode is like a very tuned version of that for developers specifically.
I see this really helping like the DevOps lifecycle, right at the very beginning, where you're in like the planning and building stage, like that MVP prototyping. I see this like being that really fluid bridge there between them. So really awesome. Anyway, I'm going to let you carry on. I'm just going to skim through the chat and see if there's any more comments or questions we can pick out. If anyone has any, throw them in there.
Perfect. And then the one last thing that I wanted to show is like just an example of what that alternate use case could be, right? So let me go ahead and go back to this file, and I'm going to click on this pricing page, and I'm actually going to demonstrate what this could be in terms of like how having this design context is helpful, both from an engineering standpoint, but also just understanding the context of your code base. So once again, I'm going to close this demo file. I'll leave this for now. I don't need this open, but I'll leave that and start a new chat. And now I'm going to do get variable defs. So this is a different tool in the MCP. This is for us to understand which tokens are being used in the file or in our current selection, and then being able to understand that. And I also want to read, where is it? Theme.css, and tell me if everything is mapped to the right value. And instead of agent mode, I'm going to switch to ask mode for this, and go ahead and run that. So once again, it's asking me to run this tool. We have all this stuff over here. I'm going to go ahead and run this. Oop. We run into our first issue here. Oh, hold on. Let's reset that. And let's run this back. And let's make sure we restart our server. First thing, as an engineer, have you tried turning it off and on again?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And I'm just gonna, if you press up on your keyboard, you can always just bring back the previous prompt. So let's run this back again. Make sure that we have our selection. I'm selecting pricing page, and oop, this is always nifty. But you know what? Why don't I just take the node ID? Let's try that. So I'll show the alternate way of doing this. So this, you can provide the URL to whatever your current selection is, and the MCP cares specifically about this node ID to be able to understand what it's picking. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And you can see that it pulled out the node ID. You can see it got all of that context. And now it's showing where the color mismatches are. So again, really great tool for being able to audit even some of these things, right? Being able to
Pretty good for accessibility.
Yep, exactly.
Really good. So
a great another interesting thing here is like you might notice that there's some code syntax here that's mapping to the variables that we have in our code base, although that's not how they appear in Figma. So in Figma, we'll actually see, and we can look this up in the variables table. So let's take a specific example. We have the typography variables, right? So we're going to go ahead and go down to type. We're going to go to, let's look at like heading font weight, right? Where is it? Heading, font weight, heading, font weight. And you'll notice that in Figma, it's actually listed as heading /font weight. But we also allow designers and engineers to be able to provide this code syntax. And this code syntax is a way for you to manually put in what this association should be in web and iOS and Android, so that we're providing and surfacing the right context. And while you can do this using the Figma UI, we also have our plugin and REST APIs to be able to do this programmatically and do this at large. And a really interesting use case for the Dev Mode MCP, but also just AI agents in general, is as a mechanism to help write some of these plugins and integrations that can be used continuously. So you can use the AI, you can use an AI solution earlier and lower your dependence on them afterwards by creating deterministic programmatic solutions that you can continue to use. And it lowers the overall effort and the cost of doing these things. And so it's a great way to think about this in a way that, like, I think is kind of overlooked sometimes when we're looking at the full, create an app use case.
Awesome. We've got one question in the chat, and it's quite a fun one. It's
let's do it.
Work Holland. He said, can it go the other way? Could Claude create the design?
That's a fantastic question, and it's something that the team is actively thinking about. We cannot do this currently today. Cannot do this currently today with the Dev Mode MCP server. There might be other solutions, but Dev Mode is primarily a read-only surface, and that's part of why we scoped it down to just reading the data. The team is actively thinking about this. Please, please, please share your feedback as a way for them to understand your use cases and why you would want to do this. And it would be a great way for us to kind of make sure that we're supporting all the different workflows that you might have in mind. Now, as we wrap up, I just want to make sure that I share just how you can get all these different resources. Why don't I jump to this? I'm just going to bring this down. Whoops. So it's going to look a little messy for a second as I bring this down. Here's a QR code that will take you to the slide. There's also a link. And this has links to all the different things that we talked about. So we have an overview of the Dev Mode MCP server. We have an install guide as well as like best practices. We have SDS, the GitHub repo for the code base that we were using to demonstrate all these different things. But if you're a developer and you want to help contribute to Figma research, we're thinking about like, how can we serve developers better? And even if you don't currently use Figma, highly, highly recommend signing up to join some of this research panel. And we would love to get your feedback, and you could potentially get paid for it. So always great to hear from developers. Make sure we're serving you in the best ways. And fantastic.
Amazing stuff, Akbar. That was a really powerful demonstration. I really love how you're sort of working over at Figma to really join up the two, development and design, and like create that bridge between us. I think it's amazing to see this. It's going to help so many devs and so many teams.
Yeah.
This is really, really awesome. So yeah, please send your feedback in to Figma. Like everything, we always want to hear what's going on from both sides, how you're using it, what you're playing with, and what you want to see from these products. It's all open, they're all ears, and they're really creating something really awesome for everybody out there. So I think that is a wrap up from us here. So a massive thank you, Akbar. Give me a virtual round of applause. And how can people get hold of you? How can people get hold of you if they want more questions? Because I guarantee you, people are going to watch this video and want to ping you.
Yeah, fantastic. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram, Blue Sky, all the different social platforms. I'm at actually Akbar on most of those platforms, and on LinkedIn, I think I'm just Akbar Mirza. So you can find me at any of those places. You can always also just shout out directly to Figma, and it'll come to me through our social team. One last thing that I would just love to say is just kind of, I've been working as an engineer who's very passionate about design for 5-10 years at this point. And it's a really, really exciting time in terms of all the different things that you can do and all the different things that you are kind of unblocked from, even if you were afraid of like, oh, I don't know that thing yet, so I can't approach that. I don't know this thing yet, so I can't approach that. In terms of, it's a great time to learn. It's a great time to experiment and learn. I'm really, really excited about what people are going to build with this.
Absolutely. These kind of things are just removing those roadblocks for lots of engineers and lots of folks in so many different domains. Like, I think at the moment, there's a huge learning curve to be done. with these sort of tools and understanding how to use them. So it's like really getting back to basics and understanding your tool set that you can play with, like from the get-go, like even VS Code, for example, like how you set these MCP servers up in different ways for it to act and behave in different ways as well. It's really interesting. So really awesome demo, and massive thank you for coming on the VS Code stream.
Of course.
And to everybody else, keep tuned or stay tuned for the next stream coming up, whenever that may be. And for now, we will say thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.